Today's video we're going to take a look at bait casting reels with some simple tips on how to get the best out of them.
Can you do it like this? Oh yeah!
Okay, so we're going to take a look at the braking systems. There's two important things to look at when you're tuning a bait caster. You've got the spool tension knob, which we're going to focus on later, and then there's the brakes. The brakes are arguably more important because they're controlling what's happening as the lure's flying through the air. And it's the brakes that you need to pay attention to on a windy day, for example, or if you switch from a jerk bait, which is quite an aerodynamic lure. So if you're casting something like this, it's not going to pick up as much wind resistance as, let's say, something like a spinnerbait. So something like this, or I don't know, if we were looking at a skirted jig, which is quite popular. You know, these aren't as aerodynamic. So if you're casting these, if you're moving from lure to lure, you want to be just looking at what braking you're applying and adjust it accordingly. Okay, so there's two types of brakes. You've got the centrifugal, which is under my finger here, and there's the magnetic. Centrifugal one's probably the most common one that you like to come across. They're small brake blocks which apply tension to the spool. The more blocks that are on, the more tension that's on the spool. This can be further fine-tuned on some of the reels using the fine-tune knob. It's the fine-tune knob, which you can just see here, which changes, it just fine-tunes how much brake is actually being applied. You want to be applying more brakes if you're casting into a headwind or if you're using things like a spinnerbait. The only downside to applying more brake is you're going to lose a bit of casting distance, but it's a fine balance. As you get more proficient, you can find you can take more blocks off. Your distance will increase, but you'll need to focus on thumbing the spool just as it's going through the air. Okay, secondly, you've got the magnetic brake. So this one here is the Shimano Aldebaran. This is a very popular BFS reel. It's designed for casting a lot lighter lures than you can use, let's say, on a more traditional bait caster. This has got a series of magnets, which is in here. I've got all four in just for this demo. I tend to use four more commonly, actually, especially if I'm using lighter lures. Just gives me a bit more peace of mind that I'm not going to get a nasty backlash. Okay. Magnet works in exactly the same principle. They sit under the side plate. You can add or remove them. They're quite fiddly to get out. You've got a fine-tune knob, which you can see here. You've got number 6, which is its highest setting. As you can see, that is really protruding the magnets there. As I back that off a little bit, so as I wind it down, you can see that it's retreated. In a real-world example, this would be applying less pressure on the spool, sort of less brake on the spool. And then as you turn the dial, the magnetic resistance increases. So if I was casting a small skirted jig or a spinnerbait, I'd perhaps have it on number 6. And then if I was casting a jig head or a Ned or something like that, something with less resistance, you back it off to number 1. Or you just sit it on number 3 as a bit of a happy medium there. Mag brakes are great. They're not essential. Very, very easy to use. Yeah, there you go. So one more thing we're going to take a look at before we get out on the water is spool tension knob. This is probably the most important thing when you first get to the water. So before you even make your first cast, you want to be tightening this right up so the spool barely spins. You see there, I'm trying to spin the spool. It's not moving. We're going to show you more detail later on in the video what happens, but just to give you an idea what the spool tension knob's doing, it is exactly as it sounds really. It's applying tension to the spool. So that's with the most on, and then if I loosen it off, I'm going to loosen it right off. You'd never have it at this, but you'll see the spool starts spinning freely. And then if I tighten that up, it'll slow it right down. So if I go again, barely moving. So you'll see, as I say, you'll see the importance of this later on in the video. I just wanted to point that out while I'm here. There's a lot of people that don't know this and how to set it up. And as I say, this is one of the most important, probably more important than the mag or the centrifugal brakes. If you don't get spool tension right and you're not aware on how to feather the spool as your lure's landing, and by feathering I mean just using your your finger to act as a brake. Like if you aren't aware of that, your lure will be hitting the water, and that's when you're going to get your overrun. So that's feathering. Well, you get your spool tension knob right, your spool should just come to a nice clean stop when the lure hits the water, and you won't get any backlash. Okay, so the first thing you do when you get to the water, tighten the spool tension knob up to its fullest, press the spool release button. As you can see, there's no line playing out, the lure's not falling. What the spool tension knob's doing is putting tension on the spool to stop it spinning. You want to gently release that, and as you do that, the lure's going to start falling. The lure needs to fall on a very, very slow fall. When it hits the water, you want the spool to stop moving. That's when you know you've got enough tension. So if you take too much tension off the spool, as it hits the water, you'll get a backlash because there's nothing stopping the spool spinning. Okay, so we'll make a quick cast now and show you what happens when the lure hits the water. Spool stopped perfectly. No overrun, and then you can start your retrieve. Now if we have that spool tension knob released too much, not only is it going to overrun when the lure hits the water under my feet, when I make the cast at distance, it's going to allow me to cast further because there's less tension on the spool. But when the lure hits the water, I'm going to need to feather the spool with my thumb to just prevent the overrun. As you become more proficient with casting, this is where you can start tweaking a little bit with it and just letting it spin a little bit faster. It will increase your distance, but then you need to start feathering. So just using your thumb to feather the spool to prevent the overrun at the end. Okay, so now we're going to cast the spinnerbait. When using the spinnerbait, you want to set your spool tension knob as normal, so really slow fall. But because of that resistance that you're going to encounter as it goes through the air, you want to apply more brake. So it's best when you're starting off with a spinnerbait is to put your brake up to number 6. This will prevent the overrun while the lure's in the air. So as the lure picks up its resistance through the air, the spool will slow down. Yeah.
Can you do it like this? Oh, yeah.